Let us talk about the Old English period, which is otherwise known as the Anglo Saxon period and is typically considered to have begun around the mid 5th century, and due to the features like invasion of England by Germanic tribes. It continued from 449 to 455. Germanic tribes such as the Angles, Anglo-Saxons and Jutes invaded England, displacing the native Celtic-speaking population. This event marked the beginning of the Old English period and had a profound impact on the language, culture, and literature of England. Some notable events and dates that mark the beginning of the Old English period include in 439 AD, the traditional date for the arrival of the Germanic tribes in England. In 455, the Battle of Aylesford, which marked the beginning of the Germanic conquest of England. And in 597, the arrival of Christian missionaries in England led by St. Augustine of Canterbury, which introduced Christianity and Latin influence to the Anglo-Saxon culture. These events laid the foundation for the development of Old English language and literature, which would flourish over the next few centuries. The Old English period has a rich and complex background, shaped by various historical, cultural, and linguistic factors. Let us think of some key aspects. Thinking of historical background, let us come to Roman withdrawal. The Roman Empire withdrew its legions from Britain, leaving the island vulnerable to invasion in 410 CE. In Anglo-Saxon invasion from 449 to 455, Germanic tribes such as the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes invaded England, displacing the native Celtic-speaking population. And thirdly, establishment of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The invaders established various kingdoms, including Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, and Kent. Let us think of the cultural background. The Germanic culture, Celtic influence, and Christianity. Thinking about Germanic culture, the Anglo-Saxons brought their Germanic culture, including the language, customs, and traditions. Thinking of Celtic influence, the native Celtic speaking people had a significant impact on the developing Anglo-Saxon culture. And thirdly, the introduction of Christianity in the 7th century had a profound impact on Anglo-Saxon culture, literature, and art. Let us come to the linguistic background. At first, we talked about the historical background, then we talked about the cultural background. Now we are coming to the linguistic background. What happened? Three things happened in a major way. Germanic language. The Anglo-Saxons spoke various Germanic languages which eventually merged to form Old English. And it had some Latin influence. The introduction of Christianity brought Latin influence which had a significant impact on the development of Old English. And thirdly, runes and alphabet. The Anglo-Saxons used runes and ancient Germanic alphabet before adopting the Latin alphabet. Three major things happened and left a very indelible linguistic impact on the language. And let us come to social and economic background. Three things also happened here: the tribal society, agriculture and trade, warfare and raiding. In tribal society, Anglo-Saxon society was organized into tribes with a complex system of kinship and social hierarchy. Thinking of agriculture and trade, the Anglo-Saxons were primarily agriculturalists, with trade and commerce playing a significant role in their economy. And thinking of warfare and raiding were common features of Anglo-Saxon life, with the Vikings posing a significant threat from the 9th century onwards. This complex background shaped the language, literature, and culture of the Old English period, which would go on to influence the development of English literature and language for centuries to come. And thinking about the literary features, the Old English period, which spanned from the 5th to the 11th centuries, has distinct literary features that reflect the culture, language, and values of the Anglo-Saxon people. Here are some key literary features. Let us think of the poetic features first. Four major poetic features can be marked if we read it: the alliterative verse, the caesura, canings, imagery, and symbolism. Thinking of alliterative verse, Old English poetry is characterized by alliterative verse, where words with the same initial sound are repeated. And poems often feature caesura or pauses within lines. And poets used canings or metaphorical descriptions to create vivid imagery. Fourthly, Old English poetry is rich in imagery and symbolism, often drawing on nature and mythology. Narrative features are epic poetry, oral tradition, and formulaic composition. In Old English literature, features epic poems such as Beowulf, which tell stories of heroes and battles. Many Old English works were composed orally before being written down. And thinking of formulaic composition, poets used formulaic composition where they repeated and varied phrases and lines to create a sense of rhythm and continuity. Narrative features are three: epic poetry, oral tradition, and formulaic composition. Let us come to linguistic features. There are also three very major impacts. Three major components. Inflectional ending. Old English words had inflectional ending that indicate a grammatical function. They have complex syntax too. Old English sentences often feature complex syntax with multiple clauses and phrases. And the vocabulary of Old English period was Old English vocabulary was heavily influenced by Germanic language and Latin. Talking about the thematic features, we can mark three major features too: heroism and courage, Christianity and morality, nature and the human conditions. Let us come one by one. Old English literature often celebrates heroism and courage as seen in Beowulf. Many Old English works explore Christian themes and morality, such as The Wanderer. And lastly, Old English literature often reflects on the human condition and the natural world. So we have pointed out three major points: heroism and courage, Christianity and morality, nature and the human conditions. These literary features, among others, contribute to the unique character of Old English literature and provide a window into the culture and values of the Anglo-Saxon period people. What are its origins? The origins of Old English literature are complex and multifaceted, reflecting the cultural, linguistic, and historical contexts of the Anglo-Saxon period. Some key factors are Germanic origins. In Germanic origins, we can mark Germanic tribes. The Anglo-Saxons were Germanic tribes who migrated to England from the continent. They had the oral tradition. Germanic cultures had a rich oral tradition with stories, poems, and songs passed down through generations. They had a mythology and legend. Germanic mythology and legends, such as the stories of the gods and goddesses, influenced Old English literature. What are the Celtic influences? Celtic culture, the native Celtic speaking population of England, had a significant impact on the developing Anglo-Saxon culture. And Thinking about Celtic Christianity, which emphasized the importance of learning and literature, influenced the development of Old English literature. And thinking about Christian and Latin influences, Christianization, Latin learning, biblical and patristic influences are felt. Let us think about Christianization. The introduction of Christianity in the 7th century had a profound impact on Anglo-Saxon culture and literature. Similarly, Christian missionaries and scholars introduced Latin learning, which influenced the development of Old English literature. And thirdly, Old English literature reflects the influence of biblical and patristic sources, such as the works of Augustine and Gregory the Great. Then we can turn to Viking influence. Viking raids and settlements in England introduced new cultural and linguistic influences. And also, under Viking influence, we can find the Scandinavian literature. Old English literature reflects the influence of Scandinavian literature, such as the poetic Edda. Anglo-Saxon culture can be marked. It has a tribal culture. It has warfare and heroism. It has monasticism and learning. Anglo-Saxon culture was shaped by tribal traditions and values. The Anglo-Saxons celebrated warfare and heroism, which is reflected in Old English literature. Anglo-Saxons monasteries played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting learning and literature. These factors, among others, contributed to the complex origin of Old English literature, which reflects the cultural, linguistic, and historical context of the Anglo-Saxon period. And thinking of all these, if we look at it very minutely, we can mark that the Old English period that started around 450 and ended in 1100 AD was a pivotal era in English language and literature because of some crucial aspects. Its Germanic invasion, development of Old English, influence of Christianity, and the existence of epic poetry, and also Cademon's hymns, then Alfred's reforms, the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, runes and manuscripts. These factors saved the Old English period, laying the groundwork for the development of Middle English and ultimately modern English. If we look at those very minutely, Germanic invasion, Germanic tribes such as Angles, Saxon and Jutes invaded England, displacing the native Celtic-speaking population. Secondly, the Germanic dialects merged to form Old English, also known as Anglo-Saxon. This language was the precursor to modern English, which is known as development of Old English. Thirdly, Christianity spread throughout England, introducing Latin and Greek influences on the language, which we can term as influence of Christianity. Fourthly, Old English literature flourished, producing epic poems like Beowulf's in 8th century and The Wanderer in 9th century, which can be kept under the title epic poetry. Then the 7th century poem is considered one of the oldest surviving pieces of English literature, that is Cademon's hymns. And in 6th stage we can mark King Alfred the Great from 871 to 899 promoted in education, literacy and translation of Latin works into Old English, and this can be termed as Alfred's reforms. Then we can think of the Anglo-Saxon chronicles. This collection of annals recorded significant events in English history from the 5th to the 11th centuries. And lastly, Old English texts were written in runes and later in Latin script, with illuminated manuscripts like the Lindisfarne Gospels from 710 to 720, showcasing the era's artistic and literary achievements, which we can group under runes and manuscripts. All the 8 points are vital Germanic invasion, development of Old English, influence of Christianity, epic poetry, Cadmon's hymn, Alfred's reforms, the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, and runes and manuscripts. If someone is to know this particular period clearly, he should mark these points and look into it very thoroughly. Thanking you.